The Short Code Podcast is a proud member of the MedEd Media Network. Inspiration, information, and guidance on your journey to medical school and beyond at mededmedia.com.
Meandering in the margins of medicine, it's the Short Code Podcast.
Weird news,
fresh views,
helpful clues, and interviews.
By students, for students.
Subscribe to our weekly show at theshortcode.com.
Welcome back to the Short Code Podcast, a production of the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. I'm Dave Etler in the studio today and live streaming on our Facebook group, the Short Code Student Lounge. Rising M2, Rick Gardner is here.
Hello, fellow microchipped reptilians.
And Aline Sanduk, an MD PhD student, has graced us with her presence.
Yep, they let me out of the lab just for this.
Oh, that's nice. AJ Chowdhury is joining us from the internet. Hello, AJ.
Hello.
And as is our special guest, New York Times bestselling author, Johns Hopkins surgeon. His book, The Price We Pay, is out June 8th on paperback. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Marty Makary.
Great to be with you guys.
Hey, before we start, we need to hear from our listeners. Comments, topic suggestions, rants, raves, most important, your questions. So send all those things to theshortcoats@gmail.com, and we'll talk about them on the show now that that's dispensed with. Marty, we had you on the show almost 100 episodes ago when your book came out in hardcover. First of all, how's it been going?
Great. It's going great. First of all, great to see you guys and really excited to be back. You've been productive since the last time we've chatted 2 years ago.
Well, I try. I never really guarantee that, but
True, it just happens. He's just magical like that.
Yeah. But yeah, the book doing well, I take it.
Yeah, the book did great. And so what we did is did a second edition, which is also in paperback. It just came out and I'm really excited about it. It's got a section looking back on COVID and how our healthcare system needs to be designed differently. And also just a lot of great success stories. I kind of consider the book to be the business of medicine 101, all the basics. And it allows anybody to start having serious conversations using the same lexicon and understanding the system. That's why I wrote it. I felt like there was no one book that summarized the healthcare system and framed it in the right way.
Yeah, well, as you have said already, one or two things have happened in the world of medicine since you published the book.
That's it.
I mean, you know.
3 if it was an eventful year.
I don't know, we all became amateur epidemiologists. There was a sudden increase in the awareness of the social determinants of health, like institutional racism in healthcare, an incredibly successful vaccine that took only a few short months from the point of view of most people to develop and test, coupled with a nation in which vaccine hesitancy went from something of a fringe problem to the mainstream. Rockstar doctors, medical politics. I mean, I could go on, and we probably will during the show today. What is this time? What have you learned in this time since COVID?
Well, I would say the number one thing that we have not been talking about that we've needed to talk about is that we've got to redesign healthcare. And I'm not talking about policies and Obamacare and whether or not we move to a different system. No, I'm talking about on the ground. The system of people coming in, navigating a big parking garage, checking in through security, sitting in a waiting room, then we see them for 10 minutes, throw meds at them, never get at the underlying issues that they need help with. Omit these giant areas of medicine that we should be talking about, like food as medicine, and the importance of good, healthy lifestyles like sleep as it relates to high blood pressure. Talking about the real issues in healthcare, and instead of just throwing meds at problems. And then we tell people, eat better and exercise more and come back in a year. And they come back and we say, you bad, non-compliant patient. That system is broken. Patients hate it. We hate it, right? We hate it as doctors and students. Why are we doing it? So there's new exciting stuff happening where we're redesigning care, and COVID kind of accelerated some of that stuff. I also think COVID exposed giant problems in our healthcare system, like a total inability to pivot for a health emergency. And we're going to have more emergencies, by the way. It's not just viral pandemics. It's hurricanes, earthquakes, mass shootings. We've got to be able to pivot quickly, answer the key questions that people have fast, not sending an application in for a grant and finding out 6 months later and sending in a proposal to the IRB to review it and then sending it to a journal, and maybe a year and a half they'll put it in print in something that nobody reads. That system is broken. Okay, we're now using MedPage Today and social media and podcasts and what you guys are doing and what my buddy Z-Dog is doing and Peter Attia. And we're trying to get stuff out and pivot quickly. We've got to be able to do that. Right now, our system is broken, and it's mostly broken because we've got an old guard legacy medical establishment that likes to do certain things certain ways. And I think we not only need age and race diversity, but we need not just race and ethnic and gender diversity, we need age diversity. Because I think young people think differently in a healthy way.
So you've dropped a lot on us there.
I was gonna say, I was like, you should have stopped about a minute through just to let us react, and then kept going.
But like we said, a
true.
lot has happened. And one of the things that I sort of, focused on when you were talking about that is this idea that medicine isn't able to pivot fast enough. And I kind of thought, from my perspective, I kind of thought that we pivoted pretty well in coronavirus land and getting to a vaccine and the study of that. Do you have is that different for you?
Yeah, so we've had these debates, right? So we've moved about 10 times faster than we've moved for anything else, like a new cancer drug.
I mean, it showed that we could do it right?
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But we still could have moved a lot faster. For example, we should have combined the phase 1 and phase 2 trials. Okay, we never have done that before. We should have done it here. I guarantee you there would have been thousands of people willing to volunteer back in the epidemic in New York when our hospitals almost got overrun to do a combined phase 1, phase 2 trial. That is, they would have done an accelerated phase 1 instead of the standard way of doing it. Give the drug instead of to just one person, wait 2 weeks, give it to 3 people, wait 2 weeks, increase the dose, wait 2 weeks. I bet you would have found 10 volunteers ready to take that. And then look, when the FDA got the application, they waited 3 weeks to schedule a meeting of their experts. It's one application, okay? This is not the college admissions office. They should have turned that thing around in 48 hours without cutting any corners on safety.
It's also,
so I was obviously
it's
pushing
also
them.
like the application that we needed to have in.
It's like, what else were you doing? We were all on lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah, and thousands of people were dying a day.
Yeah.
So that brings up a question for me. How much of that process do you think was impacted by the current administration at the time?
Well, I think they really wanted to exert their independence and say, look, we're not going to move faster, as there was some pressure on them to do that. We're going to do it on our own watch. And I think, there's a value to scientific independence, but at the same time, have a sense of urgency for the love of humanity. I mean, I wrote a couple pieces on the FDA, and the people who defend the FDA and said, they had to take their time. First of all, there were 0 serious adverse events. How many student t-tests do you need to run on the number 0? Okay, it's a small database. And then the people who defend it, I tell them, okay, the experts met on like a Thursday afternoon. We didn't get the authorization until 2 days later. What were they doing for 2 days? Okay, like 5,000 Americans died in those 2 days. Were they looking for a stapler or trying to get it notarized before they publish it? I mean, it just, they just needed to move. It's government. They needed to move faster.
I was reading into like a little bit of, some of the things with like Fauci and such, and there were bits that like there's this politicization of, everything that's happening, but it's almost like it's theatrics of it to pull an agenda. Do you think that like we took longer, they were done within the first 2 hours, but they made it seem like it was a 48-hour process because this is what science is. It's slow and it's daunting and it's methodical. Like, do you think that probably played a role? Because in my mind, that seems logical.
Look, I think you're onto something there. I think the politicalization of it was just so disappointing from day one.
I want to add to that. I think part of the reason, and I'm not defending for sure, but I wonder if they did that to increase people's confidence in the process. Like, hey, we're not rushing, we're taking our time, but at what cost? Because as you said, Marty, people were dying in the thousands. So I don't know, that was my first thought, is like they wanted us to make sure we could take them seriously. Like, no, we did our job, but these were wartime conditions.
Aline, that was actually a very serious argument that was put forth by a lot of people, is take the bureaucratic steps it needs to take to stretch it out just so people have more confidence. And internally, there were conversations that, let's slow it down just so there's more confidence in it. My philosophy is be transparent with the American public. American seniors were sitting ducks, dying in the order of 2,000 to 3,000 a day. If the data show 0 serious adverse events and a 95% efficacy, put that data out there and let people make their decision. I think we kind of went from one extreme to the other, where we approved it and then started talking about vaccine mandates. That wasn't healthy either.
Yeah, there were a lot of, from my perspective, I think, first of all, I just want to acknowledge, it's kind of fun to go back and pick apart people's decisions. I mean, this is good stuff.
There's a saying about that, hindsight being something.
Right. I think in hindsight, one of the things that I have trouble with is the whole idea of masks in the beginning. Like, I know we didn't have PPE, right? Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of hemming and hawing on the part of the CDC about whether masks were effective or not effective. And the CDC came down on the side of, well, we don't know, so don't wear masks. And I don't know, I wonder if it had been different, basically, like if what would have been the harm in saying from the beginning, right now, masks are the only thing we know to prevent the spread of airborne pathogens. I don't know if that's quite right, but that's the only thing we have to prevent the spread, aside from vaccines, and we don't have a vaccine yet. So wear a mask. Fashion one from a t-shirt. Make one out of a paper towel. I don't know, like, don't use up the mask that we need, but wear a mask. And that's something that always bothers me. And then earlier this year, they were super cautious about the effectiveness of vaccines. We don't know if they work. We don't know if they'll last. We don't know this. We don't know that. And it always kind of bothered me, because I felt like we should have, if at least in the mask case, if it wasn't going to be harmful and it was probably going to be effective, I wish they had just said, wear masks.
I think one of my biggest issues with that, and trying to play a centrist role in understanding, like, taking in the information and processing it, is we were so one way and then we flipped overnight. So I did a little digging on, like, dates and such. So in, like, February, there was evidence from the CDC that was showing that there was asymptomatic spread of COVID-19, which was what makes it so contagious, one of the larger properties. But in early March and throughout March, Dr. Fauci, the CDC, and WHO all said, don't wear masks. Save them for healthcare workers, or save them if you're sick. And then up in June, or later in June, we all flipped and interviewed. Fauci even said, I said that because I didn't want to create a mask run, like a run on the mask situation, run out of PPE. And so that's like the whole theatrics of the situation going on, and the lack of transparency that had occurred. And it's, you're telling one thing and sides can flip. I can understand that. I think there's the aspect of people who aren't regularly dealing with conflicting information and having to process that. But the lack of transparency in the message being given from public health organizations or forefront people, I think, has really contributed to a lack of trust.
This is exactly why we needed you guys contributing to public health at the highest levels. This is why we need age diversity, because the old guard medical establishment doesn't think about the practicalities the way a younger generation does. And we should have done exactly what you said, and that you're spot on 1,000%. I'm loving it. But the old guard establishment has to see a randomized controlled trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA before they believe anything. And you give them one trial and they say, oh, I need to see another study, and they'll pick apart that study. This is not epidemiology class. This is the real world, and people were dying. Why not hedge the bet and follow the clinical wisdom of doctors in Asia who had become believers in masks back during SARS-CoV-1 or MERS, right? Yeah. Why not do that?
That's literally what I was about to say, is that, like, hey, this isn't unprecedented or uncharted territory. Like, there's an entire region of the world that dealt with a SARS virus. Let's take our cues from them. Sorry, Rick, I interrupted.
No, I think it's a great point. I was just gonna make another, going back to the whole Fauci thing. At one point, he said, I think this was in June or July, it's common sense. Wearing 2 masks is more efficacious than wearing 1. And it's like, so where were we in the beginning where wearing mask wasn't for the lay person? It frustrates me because we have all these conflicting information for people who aren't used to having to deal with such intricate health care details. And it just, things could have definitely been run better. And yeah, it needs to be, I think, as you said, Aline, like wartime applicable. I mean, we're in the midst of the worst, right? You know, in early March.
Yeah, this was, I don't know what age some of the other people on the podcast were when 9/11 happened, but I was a teenager when 9/11 happened. And the legislation that moved through Congress during 9/11 was like unprecedented since like World War II, World War I. Like they passed bills like, all right, I can't sign fast enough. And a lot of people are comparing coronavirus to 9/11. Like so many more people died during this pandemic than 9/11.
So how much of that government inaction do you think was due to the lack of a sticker shock of, you know, at one point there was literally a 9/11 amount of people dying every day from COVID, but because it was spread out across the entire country, you didn't see it. You didn't see bodies being piled up in a morgue. You just saw these numbers go up on a graph. And maybe if you have older relatives, you actually see people passing away from it. But for the most part, it kind of just happened and nobody really saw it because everybody was inside.
Well, so at one point on CNN, I can't remember, on one of the mainstream media channels, they had drone footage, like aerial footage of hospital staff in New York City literally digging mass graves. I mean, you're right. I think it was maybe a little less shocking and acute than like literally 2 buildings falling in the middle of Manhattan, but there were images like that to kind of provoke a little more action. But the political climate cannot be understated. It was really fraught. It's still really fraught.
I remember in April when everything was going down. I mean, that was during the George Floyd time, and this is kind of moving away from the healthcare aspect, but this was a really difficult time for American history. I mean, I really think this is something that people in the future will study, because I mean, we had George Floyd happening and an uproar in this, you know, social political scene. They were calling it the Great Lockdown financially, tearing people's lives apart since we hadn't seen since the Great Recession, and then just the massive amounts of people dying in a global pandemic.
So you're saying it was complicated?
Just a tad.
to say the least. Yeah. It was chaotic.
TLDR, it was a bit rough.
Humanity in 2020 had a complicated relationship.
Yeah.
There's gonna be scholars on just March 2020. I bet there's gonna be a whole body of like historical literature on like just those couple of months, because you're not wrong. Like so many of those things happened.
And it's multifactorial. It probably played into I mean, with everything going on, people are getting burned out emotionally and mentally, and that could have led to somewhat of a lack of response. You know, the shockiness of 9/11 compared to, you know, the same amount of people dying every day. I mean, what happens when it's happened 10 days in a row, 12, you know, it's just another day. Hey, the numbers are a little bit better today. It was only, you know, 90% of what it was yesterday. And it's just, I can imagine that played a role too. And
it's so frustrating. It is so, you know, my little journey as I was recounting for updating the book, The Price We Pay, a bunch of us in February before the lockdown, before the closures and the pandemic hit, we realized this was big. And the idea that somehow what was happening in Italy was contained was obvious to me. It was an idea we had to quickly abandon. And so a bunch of us decided, hey, nobody's speaking up about this. None of our public health leaders, none of our government doctors, let's band together and let's make that case using our platforms. We had a bunch of, you know, major institutions behind us in our titles. And we went to the NCAA and said, you got to cancel March Madness. We went to South by Southwest and said, you can't congregate 250,000 people from around the world in March of 2020. We went to Mardi Gras, we were less successful, and we took it on ourselves. We went on TV. I went on CNBC. You can go back and watch the tapes, pleading for businesses to shut down, to stop non-essential travel. And the whole time, people were saying, well, Dr. Fauci is not that concerned. Now, I love the guy to death, and I respect him. And he's a gentleman, trust me, I've talked to him. but they were saying as late as March 5th, the only thing he was saying, and he was on TV nonstop, is on March 5th, he said, if you're old and have a chronic condition, I would avoid going on a cruise right now. And we're like, are you kidding me? And a bunch of doctors from Johns Hopkins had a conference call with the Wuhan Central Hospital and a bunch of doctors there. And guess what they told us? Please wear a mask. They had been through SARS, and guess what? SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19, spreads exactly like SARS-CoV-1 or SARS. It's aerosolized virus. We should have known that.
Yeah.
One of the things that always kind of puzzled me about all of these things that we tried to get people to do, wear masks and even get vaccinated, is, so where were the celebrities? Where were the influencers? Where was the marketing to get people who were hesitant or who didn't believe or who weren't paying attention, basically? Where was that? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is...
Yeah, we were on your wavelength.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mentioned, being an influencer, you're based on popularity. So if you're not popular anymore, you don't have a career. So they're probably playing a game of playing a conservative.
I was about to say the same thing. I think they toe a very careful line of like not wanting to lose their viewers versus recognizing the influence, the power that they hold to, I think, move their viewers. But they're
not willing to be the change, but they're willing to embrace the change once the change is the norm.
I see.
A lot of people are always watching for where the wind blows, and then they pick the winning side, I've noticed.
And where's the humility when they get it wrong? All of our public health leaders packed into a White House briefing room, doctors with no masks, deep into the early epidemic. Where is the humility just to say, look, we got this wrong? And then we have a whole summer of Black Lives Matter conversations, a healthy conversation. But then what happens when the vaccine allocation comes out? The guidance from the CDC is so confusing. Hospitals are in this decision paralysis, giving it to like grad students who are working from home and media staff working from home. Hospital administrators, spouses are getting the first doses that get out there. And basically people in America with power and influence exert their ability to access the vaccine and cut in line in front of vulnerable Americans, and nobody was speaking up. It was like 4 of us writing and sounding the alarm and blowing the whistle on this. After a whole summer on race and equality, basically once a life-saving vaccine is on the table, it's a money grab. We had terrible medical leadership throughout the pandemic, and I think it's good for our leaders to show some degree of humility to say, look, we consistently got it wrong.
Do you think there'll be a post 9/11 report like they did after 9/11? They had this massive investigation of what happened. Do you think there will be something through the U.S. government to hopefully analyze what we've done and report hopefully objectively and unbiased? Because I think it's critical that we do that. I mean, this is what was the one guest we had back? He also wrote a book. He said this is a once in a century opportunity as well to change healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
We ran an experiment and we got very mixed results in terms of our success. So yeah, I hope. I don't know. I haven't heard any. Marty, have you heard of any conversation around that?
The only sort of report on like a 9/11 commission report that I know of is my book, The Price We Pay, where in the back I have a COVID section looking back on the COVID pandemic.
Nice.
But no, I don't know. I don't think we're going to get one, unfortunately. We might get one on the Wuhan Central Hospital lab leak hypothesis.
Which is also interesting.
That's incredible to me.
That's up and growing as of like the past week or two, right?
Yeah.
Can I tell you, to take the I like the way you put that, to take the centrist approach. When Trump and his people were saying that, people were losing this racist, I can't believe you dare say that. But because it's Biden, it's totally cool now to suggest that the Chinese leaked the virus.
That's an interesting observation.
Yeah. I listened to a podcast and they're like, Mark Zucker, he had his reporters like, hey, we have this idea. It might have been leaked from a lab. And they're like, yeah, run it. And they're like, but wait, Trump said, no, cancel, get off the press,
Yep.
So sad.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the lab leak hypothesis is no longer a hypothesis. In my opinion, it is the default conclusion of the circumstantial evidence. look, we're not going to know with 100% certainty. We don't know with 100% certainty that Abraham Lincoln existed, but we have a very high degree of certainty based on putting enough pieces together. And when you know, and only students would know this, right? Lab accidents are common. And by the way, those experiments
that has never happened in my lifetime. How dare you suggest I've ever done anything wrong in lab? I need to go right now.
Maybe I'm the only one that's had like almost one lab accident for every 2 lab experiments I've ever conducted in my life.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Well, and you know that there's a distinction to be made between you know somebody spilling a beaker,
Sure.
or whatever, which is what everybody thinks of when you're talking about lab accidents, versus what
taking home a BSL-3 contagion.
Right. Like that would be one kind of accident, and the other kind of accident, which is, oh, I don't feel well after working in the lab, I'm going to go to the hospital and give it to a bunch of people. And
is that kind of the theory that's?
It's one that I've read. What have you read?
I think, look, 3 lab workers were treated at the Wuhan Central Hospital in November. And that's where we've always believed case 0 would have occurred in late October or November, just based on the epidemiological tracing. What are the odds that the first hospital to see COVID patients is 5 miles from one of the few labs in the world managing and characterizing coronaviruses? Okay, that's almost enough information right there. And then what if I told you that 2 of the doctors who initially saw those patients and blew the whistle were reprimanded and detained by the police, and that one is no longer alive despite being 32 years of age and low risk of died of COVID. Yeah. There's enough pieces where I think we have all the information we're ever going to have. We're not going to get more information. So when all these politicians grandstand our demand a full investigation, guess what? You're not going to get any more information. Those original virus samples are burned, incinerated, and in a dumpster right now.
Yeah.
Can we talk more, because you mentioned it just now, the scientist that he acted as a whistleblower for the leakage of the virus, or the being a whistleblower for the severity that it presented. Can you talk more about that? Because I don't know a lot about it, but I think it's an important point to bring up.
Yeah, amazing guy, by the way. And I wrote a piece in MedPage Today. And by the way, if you guys ever want to write something in MedPage Today, I'm the editor there. We're trying to create more of a forum, instead of the New England Journal of Medicine process of waiting 2 years to hear back on your manuscripts. And so I wrote a piece there on the heroes of the pandemic, which are really the Chinese doctor. Remember, I think what's lost is the Chinese people are wonderful people, and they don't represent the Chinese Communist Party and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And the Chinese people, one of their greatest heroes, and the number one hero of the pandemic for them, is Dr. Li Wenliang, the first doctor to blow the whistle, trying to warn the hospital, the community, and the world of a respiratory virus that could become catastrophic. He was detained by the police, forced to sign a confession, this is public information, reprimanded not only privately, we don't even know what happened in that detention facility. He was certainly threatened. Remember, the Chinese government will execute government officials the same day that they are identified as having caused and engaged in corruption. That's the type of government you're dealing with. He was probably very scared, signed the confession, and on the TV, there was a message out that some doctors were spreading an inappropriate rumor about a contagious pneumonia. They ran that, the state TV ran it over and over again, and the doctors in the hospital were told, you are not allowed to talk about a respiratory pathogen in the community. The head of the emergency room, after this doctor got sick, she took on the cause and she went missing. And her, not Twitter handle, but it's called WeChat in China, kind of went silent after she was sounding the alarm. And then she was like posting rainbows and talking how much she loves her country. And then the guy who got the original gene from the lab where the samples were processed, he's a well-known scientist, and he was deciding, do I release the genetic sequence to the world? For 5 days, a doctor in Australia, a friend of his, was urging him to do this and offered to do it if he just emailed the genetic sequence of COVID-19. Wow. He knew that if he did that, he could be killed, maybe the same day that he did it. 5 days he was sweating this decision. He eventually sent it. It was posted to the world. Within 2 days, Moderna designed their vaccine. And within a week, Germany released a toolkit for the world to develop a test for COVID-19. Dr. Zhong is a hero.
Yeah.
His lab was shut down, but he's still alive today.
And I was like, that's cool.
All right, use this as your bathroom break, everyone.
No, I need to take a break to talk about our sponsor.
Yes. Please stay and listen to our sponsors because we really need you to.
Panacea Financial is a company founded by two doctors that were frustrated as medical trainees that banks didn't seem to understand the unique needs of those in the medical field. So they weren't passive. They built a company just for medical students and doctors. With nationwide digital banking, Panacea Financial provides medical students with free checking that includes no ATM fees nationwide, high-yield savings accounts, a free personal banker, around-the-clock customer support with loans designed for you and mine. No one should borrow more than they need. But with Panacea Financial, fourth-year medical students can get money as needed in as little as 24 hours with their PRN personal loan. That's an interest rate half of a usual credit card. No cosigner requirement, and it's a fully digital application. Instead of running up credit card debt, try their new PRN personal loan that is designed to give you a better way to cover expenses such as residency applications and relocation or board exams. Some customers actually use it to pay off toxic credit card debt. In addition, medical students can have a period of no or reduced payments on their PRN personal loan. So join the growing number of medical students and physicians nationwide that expect more from their bank. Go to panaceafinancial.com today to open your free account. Panacea Financial is a division of Primis, member FDIC.
I just had a feeling I haven't had in a long time, which is like when I was a kid and I was watching a TV show and my parents changed a channel at the most important moment and there wasn't TiVo, there wasn't Netflix. If you weren't taping it, you were done. You missed out. There was no internet to look up the ending. You broke my heart, Dave.
Look.
You broke my heart.
Aline, you just cannot be made happy today.
Sponsor-
I love it when Dave says high yield.
Sponsors are important. Let's move on. Or let's continue the processing of that bombshell. I've given you... You know what? I gave you a minute to process.
That's true.
Aileen, was that from Analyze This? You broke my heart. Was that the line from the movie?
No, but can I change my mind and have it be from that? Because that's a great reference.
That was the best part of that movie. Analyze This.
What a do you guys know that movie?
No.
It was a movie with Billy Crystal
and
Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
He's a mobster who starts to have these I don't know, like a midlife crisis, and he can't kill bad guys like he used to, and he goes to Billy Crystal to be his shrink, and it's just hijinks galore. That's a crazy story. Is that gonna get published? Is anyone doing the investigative journalism to put that story together and memorialize these people, these veritable heroes?
It's amazing. Most of that was on the internet if you piece it together, and without even calling people close to it in China, I was able to put that piece together in MedPage Today on China's heroes. I hope journalists start doing their job. Journalism is basically dead in America. There's no more public accountability for local governments or large corporate medicine establishments. We've got giant hospitals engaging in predatory billing and suing patients, a practice that my team and I have largely shut down in the United States by creating some attention around it in the book, The Price We Pay, and partnering with journalists. But we need more people writing. For all your listeners out there, write something and send it to Newsweek or the New York Times or MedPage Today or JAMA Opinion. Or we need more people writing. It's not that hard. I think right now the only voices we hear from are the old guard establishment. And I think we need people with more of a social justice value. And right now, your generation, social justice is a generational value.
We actually have a group that is in the Carver College of Medicine right now that is doing editorial writing. I can't remember what it's called.
The doctor is in.
Yeah, the doctor is in. They're doing editorial writing on a local level. I'm gonna pass on your suggestion to them, Marty.
I want to make a comment that just like I really do see that, and I agree with what you're saying. You know, I made the reflection that my class, so the ones that are class of 2024, it's really cool to be around these individuals. I mean, not only the brightest individuals I've ever been surrounded by, but individuals who are seeking to just change how everything works. People who see issues and they're vocal about it. I mean, loud and disruptive, but in a, you know, a cooperative in pushing forward productive way. And it's the coolest thing, because I feel like I'm surrounded by the people that are going to make things better. And it's really inspiring.
And, you know, I agree. No diss on previous classes or anything. But yes, there has been an increase, as far as I can tell, in this sort of discussion and this sort of demands. That
I joined my first book club. That's a whole other topic. But before a class,
reading is hard, Rick.
I still don't even know if I can do it.
You don't have to tell us. We're med students. We know.
But before classes started,
I just watch cartoons. Watching cartoons and learning all about the bugs and drugs through it. No reading here.
All right, stop showing off more. All right.
Saying before classes started, they had a race and health disparities seminar that I took part in, and some of my colleagues started a book club, and we opted to read 3 different books. I only read 2 of them, about just different things going on in healthcare and being a physician or a clinician just in general, and how we can do better. What are the issues and how we can do better? And like I said, my first book club, and that was it. And that's a heck of a first step. So very cool, very privileged, or very honored to be around the individuals that I am.
You know, that's the mindset that we've got to adopt right now in healthcare, and we can't leave it up to the old guard establishment. The New England Journal of Medicine has 51 editors, 1 African American and 1 Hispanic. If we leave it up to that generation to figure out how to pivot quickly in a health emergency, how to redesign the way we share information through publishing, the gauntlet, the ridiculousness of medical education today in America, where you got to learn the freaking Krebs cycle and memorize every intermediate at 4 different times in your education to regurgitate it. You never need to know that in clinical practice. I mean, if we leave it up to these folks, we're going to be broken 10, 20, 50 years from now. And it's a false choice that I think students are given. You got to pick one of these specialties. You got to pick an organ in the body. Okay, you got to pick derm, or you got to pick OB or anesthesiology. Guess what? You should be able to pick the redesign of healthcare. You should be able to pick the topics that we're passionate about, like making medical arguments to address human rights violations instead of just political arguments, and addressing food as medicine, and talking about environmental exposures that cause cancer, not just memorizing chemo drugs. We've got to start changing the conversation about the overall system that's broken, and we need to be able to just pick up that system, shatter it, pick up the pieces, and start over. And people are doing that right now. You look at ChenMed, you look at Iora, you look at Oak Street, Landmark, all these disruptors that I write about in the book, The Price We Pay. These are clinical leaders. They're people who went to med school and said, this system is so freaking broken, I want to be a part of designing something different. And we can't rely on the government to give us a new, health reform, because they're just talking about different ways to finance healthcare. We need to talk about how to fix healthcare. So that's where our education, I think, is giving students false choices, saying you can only pick one of these narrow areas and you have to practice it full time or you're no good.
That's such a good point. Yeah. Never more than right now have 2 schools of thought been more at odds about what healthcare should look like, who should pay for it, what it should even cost, and
how it should be delivered.
Yeah.
So, Marty, I'm a member of the state of Iowa's chapter of the AMA, and I see my classmates, my colleagues, working hard to lobby the state legislators and coming up with resolutions to propose nationally. And then, you see announcements coming out nationally from AMA, like they recently released a report on healthcare equity and ways we can address it from the level of education. but then I don't see actually laws being passed at the largest levels that would actually meet these. Do you think that there's going to be an eventual reconciliation between this older generation as they retire and the upcoming generation that's really hyped up about making changes for equity and for the general good instead of for profit?
I do, AJ. I think there will be. I think people are fed up with the way we're doing medicine. I mean, honestly, who wants to see patients for 8 to 10 minutes, 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 every day, and have half a day to catch up on your billing notes and your billing codes? You know, when you take the board exam now in plastic surgery, let's say you want to go and do cleft lip repair and you want to do burn surgery and cancer reconstruction as a plastic surgeon. On your board exam and the oral exams, they ask you what the billing code is for the different procedures. I mean, what a joke, right? Somebody needs to push back and say, you guys have to be kidding me. You've completely succumbed to corporate medicine. And so I think people are getting fed up right now, and I think it's going to depend on your generation to say, we're going to do things differently. And I hope those conversations in the AMA, which are healthy, and I'm glad they're taking place, I think they hope they move outside of our internal echo chambers of medicine, because we got to be out there. We got to be in the New York Times. Why do you think I write for the Wall Street Journal and USA Today and go on cable news? We got to be out there. Too much of what we do is we're just writing abstracts and talking to ourselves at our meetings, and we're saying, congratulations, this will help you internally get a residency. It's a silly game, and enough people now are saying we got to redesign that whole system.
Did you start off as a rabble rouser?
Well, I got to tell you,
That's his day job.
Were you like these guys in med school where they're like, you know, talking about these big topics, or did you come to it later? What do you think?
I do remember this. I do remember doing my master's in public health at Harvard, and I've just loved every second of it. I was like, finally we're getting to the underlying things that bring people into the hospital. And then I just realized, you know, talking to mentors, it's important to do a residency to have that credibility as a clinician. Yeah. So I chose a residency. I happened to choose surgery. And my mentor said, now, you got to kind of table all your outside interests and eat, drink, and sleep surgery for the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I did that. And at that time, I took in the observations. I wrote them down. I wrote a bunch of my experiences down. That was basically my book, Unaccountable, which was turned into the TV series, The Resident. Without my creative, I'm not the director or writer of that TV series, but they used the book Unaccountable to make that show. And it was basically these observations of, why do we do things that way? Can't we do it better? More people are dying from sloppy handwriting at the time and writing hand prescriptions than from the medications themselves with their adverse events. These are the big questions that we don't tend not to ask. We just sort of accept that's the way of doing business. But I remember taking sort of a pause from thinking about the health of the public health, and just focusing on a clinical specialty. And ultimately, I think having that residency gives you a little more credibility in talking about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I have observed on the show over the years and just working in med school is that, yeah, you do have to, there is a period residency where you just kind of give up a lot of stuff that you've been thinking about or wanting to address. But you can come back to it later and make it your other specialty, you know?
Yeah.
But people will listen to you. Like, you're right. Being a practicing doctor carries a lot of credibility.
You got to get there first, and you know
the process can take a lot out of you.
And it can, and yeah, there's the danger, I guess, of as the process takes a lot out of you, of like losing sight of that thing that you wanted.
And then we fall back into, well, this is what happened to me, or this is how it works. This is tradition. We do it like this.
Yeah, I did it. I did it. So do you have to?
Yeah.
I think one of the big problems, or the obstacles, I think, to creating the change that we're talking about is that a lot of people have the right values, but they don't have the right ways of selling these ideas to people who aren't already on our team. And that's a big problem that I encounter, because I am good at that. I'm really good at understanding people who feel differently than I do. And I'm really good at getting them to realize, like, hey, we want the same things. We're just arguing about the methods. But I think sometimes those conversations can be difficult because people mistake questions for intolerance, or just like mere inquiries as disagreement. And like, I think we all fundamentally want the same things, but we're not as good these days at selling our idea. Like, because I mean, Marty, what you're talking about is getting the old guard to see things the way we do, but we're not, I don't think we do a good job of like putting our goals on their strategic radars. And like sometimes it comes down to a matter of like, hey, have you done the math? Have you realized that what we're talking about will make you more money? And usually, I hate to say it, but that's an argument that works pretty often of like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. You're saying this is going to make me richer? Okay. And I'm not above making that argument if it gets someone on my team, right? But
Eileen, it came to light just several months ago when we had a limited supply of a life-saving vaccine, and we were losing Americans thousands a day like sitting ducks. And the question is, how do we ration wisely? Okay? And so many of us said, the data on the first dose is so impressive, 92% efficacy at 4 weeks, published in the New England Journal. Let's focus on getting first doses out there. Let's save as many people as possible. 1 dose is better than none. Let's focus on first doses, postpone the second doses to 12 weeks, effectively doubling our vaccine supply for a couple months, okay? Saving tens of thousands of more Americans if we did that. By the way, the UK did it. And
I was going to say, yeah, the UK was doing that, yeah.
UK did it, and I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal on how they basically beat us to herd immunity because they did that. Now, the old guard establishment said, no, you can't. This is the FDA-approved label. You have to come back for that second dose on time. If you don't, we don't know if your antibodies are going to drop off like a cliff. That's literally a quote from one of our public health leaders. Well, guess what? That was a far-fetched hypothesis. The efficacy, the logic on the first dose was solid. We should have done that. There's a good example of how our establishment gets so set in their ways, they don't ever think about rationing, but I think a younger mind thinks more practically.
Yeah, we're more plastic. We're definitely more open to looking at things in a different way.
Yeah.
Receptive to those different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And also I think being willing to ask questions, as you mentioned.
It takes effort to do that too, like I always say that, for an old guy like me, it takes a certain amount of effort to remain relevant and cool. I don't, you can argue whether I'm doing a good job about that or not. But the point is, like, you have to make an effort to keep that open mind. It doesn't just, I don't think for everybody it just happens or you just are that way.
I mean, this should have been an easy sell because literally 100% of people stood to benefit from a better and more equitable vaccination campaign. But yeah, I think tradition is strong. Tradition is a powerful thing.
The other piece of insanity that I cataloged in sort of a look back on COVID was, and these are all positions I took, so basically before the pandemic, I was sounding the alarm on cable news that we had to get ready and don't listen to the CDC. This thing's going to get bad. And then I wrote the first piece calling for universal masking back in the spring in the New York Times, took a lot of heat for it among doctors, lots of criticisms. This is crazy, this is insane, masks don't work. And then I put my head out there again, critical of the FDA with their approval process. And then when the vaccine rollout came, I said, why are we vaccinating people already immune from prior infection at a time when we don't have enough vaccines to protect vulnerable seniors? That was insane to me. We had at least 10% of the population documented to have had the infection. And instead, the old guard establishment again said, oh, well, we'd have to test their antibody levels, and we don't know if their antibodies are sustainable or not. Well, guess what? The data just came out that natural immunity protection is long. We actually have more data on natural immunity than we do vaccinated immunity because we've had natural immunity around longer. It's durable, it works, it's as effective as vaccines, at least so far. And so this was the insanity. And we're still seeing it, right? Public health officials all this year have talked about two groups of Americans, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Well, half of America has natural immunity. including half of the unvaccinated. They're like, hey, well, where do I fall in this? And there's this sort of, don't even discuss it, right? And that, of course, puts the projection of herd immunity further out, because if you ignore the fact that half of the unvaccinated have natural immunity, how are we going to get to 85% of the population immune? We got to do mandates, and we got to get every kid vaccinated, and we got to demonize the hesitant. Maybe people who had the infection have durable immunity from natural immunity. Our public health officials completely ignored it. And again, their average age is like 72. How about some more practical thinking folks who believe in social equity, who see the practicality of a different strategy?
I remember, this is kind of a little bit of an aside, but I remember in terms of equitable distribution of just life-saving resources, so masks or vaccines. I remember in Iowa we had, all those meatpacking plants. That was the big thing that set us off early on in terms of exponentially increasing numbers of COVID positive patients, and just seeing how we didn't adjust any of our strategy to assist those individuals at largely increased risk compared to the general public. It just blew my mind.
And not only that, not only were they at risk, these are, we don't have to name them, but they're meatpacking plants that serve the entire country and countries abroad. So helping them would not only have helped, besides the moral reasons of helping those people because they're at increased risk, it would have been such a better application of those. It would have protected, anyway, yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, Frontline did a good documentary on the meatpacking industry and showed how it's mostly Hispanic workers. They're afraid of saying something because many of them are undocumented. And the special interests that lobbied on behalf of the meatpacking food companies basically tried to keep everything hush-hush and got the government to actually issue a statement that meatpacking plants need to continue to stay open, right? As if it was like a national security issue with our food supply. I don't know if you've ever seen Frontline, but they have some really good documentaries.
What is Frontline exactly?
Oh, Frontline is the PBS documentary network, and if you go to frontline.org, you can watch any of their documentaries for free. And I don't know if that counts as maybe you can bill them and just say that we just promoted an advertisement for them.
You're a sponsor, there's no take back.
Let me just write that down. Okay, there we go.
Send it right to my Venmo account.
Frontline.org. And the topics that we go without, the social justice issues that we tackle on my team, we post those issues at restoringmedicine.org, which is our social justice half to our research. So my opinion is, when you do research, it should be to make something better, to fix something. You don't just want to characterize coronaviruses in a lab just to see what they look like, right? That's dumb. Instead, we should be doing stuff to address the giant problems facing our age, like loneliness among seniors and what causes Alzheimer's, which is a grant proposal we have in right now. We think we understand the cause of it. These are the issues we should be tackling. And when you get data, when you discover stuff, you should convert to advocacy, right? You should fight for what you believe to be important.
Not just enough, not enough just to publish.
Yeah, I mean, I just got this review from JAMA today. It made me want to vomit a little bit. It's like...
This sounds juicy. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, so we published, and, maybe they'll pull the paper because they're going to hear this. I don't know. If they do, that's fine.
Well, it'll be our little secret. You can tell Justice and our listeners.
I can edit this out.
My students, so we uncovered the practice of hospitals suing patients for unpaid bills and then garnishing their wages in court. And it was primarily, we published this in JAMA a year and a half ago, Walmart workers, food service workers, postal workers, people with insurance. And our feeling was, this is a disgrace to the great field of medicine. And we went to the CEOs and said, we know what you're doing, please stop. And if you don't stop, we're going to take it to the media. And about a third of hospitals were suing patients. Some of them stopped, maybe half. The other half, we hand packaged a story to the media, and they wrote that story over the last year and a half. It was the #1 story in health journalism. You've seen all those stories in different media outlets. Those were mostly stories we planted with the data that we collected. We've got more coming out on Axios on June 15th. That'll be, I guess, like this week. And we're shutting it down. We're shutting down the practice across the country. It violates the great public trust. When hospitals were founded, they were supposed to be a safe haven, and they were supposed to be a refuge for anybody sick, regardless of their race or their immigration status or their ability to pay. That is the great heritage of our American hospitals. Most were founded by churches or philanthropists, and that's the tradition we have to uphold. Now, 64% of Americans say that they've avoided or delayed care for fear of a bill. That's a disgrace, and that's not on us. That's our administration hounding people with, let's be honest, let's call a spade, as I do in the book, The Price We Pay. We got to change the lexicon. It's price gouging of people at a time when they're vulnerable and engaging in predatory billing, like the subprime mortgage business was doing. We can call it out. These are our services. So we're engaging with doctors and students around the country to say, speak up on this. We're trying to create public accountability through some transparency, documenting where this stuff happens. We get students around the country going to their local courthouses, asking to see records of any lawsuits by the hospital, and we're winning. We're shutting it down. And so we have this paper in JAMA coming out any day now, JAMA Open, and it shows the number of lawsuits in the United States crashing down once we started this advocacy effort with the book, The Price We Pay, the first edition. And so I got in the editor's comments today, this comment, maybe even read it here for you. It basically said, discussion is too subjective, needs to only stick to the data. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't have an emotional
In other words, you care too much. You're too close to the... You like these people? That's crazy.
You care about what you're investing your time in? What a loser.
What an insane comment. I mean, I understand. There's a real argument to be made about how being too emotionally invested in a thing can cloud your logical judgment, but without emotions, we'd be like robots. Like, emotions are what signal to us where we should invest our logic and what we care about. So that's a really weird comment to get from a reviewer.
I wasn't surprised. I was actually from the editor, and I'm not
editor.
surprised. You're right. We detach ourselves, and you see docs out there. You may have seen these docs out there. They're robots. They're basically, robots. And what's happened, and by the way, it was me at a certain point in my residency, because I'm dealing with trauma in the trauma bay. I'm overwhelmed. I'm in over my head. I didn't have good support as a resident at one of my rotations. And I detach emotionally as a coping mechanism. And you see that, right? You see that in residents we work with and in docs. And I was one of those. And sometimes we even go in and out of those different stages to cope. And the reality is, it's important to maintain an emotional connection with our subject matter, with the patients we deal with the research that we do. And it is good to be passionate about what's right.
I mean, these are the rally cries that we crave, I think, as young. We don't have enough people, like, in the older generation talking like this, and certainly not people taking action the way that you are. Because I remember I was on the original episode that you came on the show for, and you were talking about you yourself. I mean, just think about this. You, a surgeon, going down to the courthouse and arguing for patients. I was like, you're more expensive than a lawyer. Those patients are really, really lucky to have you, not just able to argue the law, but argue the medical necessity. I mean, that was really powerful. So, like, for what it's worth, like, from my humble perspective, like, thank you for not just talking the talk, but walking the walk too. We need more of that.
You're the person who's changing the paradigm.
Yeah.
You're setting the tone for the trainees like us who see that and become inspired by it and say that can be done. And if there's anything that I've learned, going back to that seminar that I had, is we have to be vocal. We can't just sit in the sidelines, because 20% of the impact that we have on patients is just the medical care. There's so many other factors, all those social determinants of health that have to be impacted, and we have to be outside of the clinic, outside the hospital, to make those differences.
Yeah.
Dr. Makary, where can people find out more about you and your work? It sounds like everywhere, first of all.
Connect on social media. I'm on all social, not on Instagram much, but LinkedIn, Twitter, although Twitter's a nasty place. I do have a presence.
We all have a presence on Twitter, yeah. It's
Yeah, we do. We all do it reluctantly, but it's it's good to push out some of the articles sometimes that I write. And then I have a website, Marty MD, and then I've got the book, The Price We Pay, is a nice sort of synopsis of all of our work to date, really the collective work of all the students I've worked with. And I'm really proud of it and the update in the paperback version that's out right now. So I invite anybody to learn about our work. We do a lot of work on the appropriateness of care. That's the other half of the book is on how do we measure appropriateness instead of just measuring complication rates? Like, do people really need this care, or are there other things that can be done? Yeah. And so we do a lot of work on appropriateness. And I will just, remind all of you that one of the great specialties you won't hear much about in medical school is primary care. And it's beautiful, and it's becoming well respected again in the community. The pay is way up now. I'm learning of a lot of job openings north of $220,000 a year to start in primary care. Those are, very close to surgeon starting salaries. So it's becoming attractive again, it's becoming respected, and it's really becoming sort of the glue now in healthcare. And it's the center of the business of medicine because primary care doctors are in charge of steering people to the right high value, appropriate care out there. So that's one of our areas of interest is primary care and appropriateness. And then finally, we're working on a billing quality score for hospitals, a 5-star billing quality score so that when you Google a hospital, you won't just get the name and address and phone number. You'll get the name, address, phone number, and the average price markup of that hospital and how they do on their billing quality score, their 5-star score. One of those stars is whether or not they sue patients. So we're trying to move the market by creating healthy competition to reward the hospitals doing the right thing, really the hospital administrators doing the right thing. The doctors are demanding this, and I think that's moving things along. So thanks for having me, and it's great to be with you guys again.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, AJ.
Thanks for having Dr. Makary on, guys. And thank you for coming, Marty.
Great. Thanks, AJ.
Aline, Rick, thank you for being on the show today with me as well.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
And what kind of ding-dong would I be if I didn't thank you, Shortcoats, for making us a part of your week? If you're new and you like what you heard today, follow the show wherever fine podcasts are available. Our editors are AJ Chowdhury and Eric Bozart, and Alex Belzer is our marketing coordinator. The show is made possible by a generous donation by Carver College of Medicine Student Government and ongoing support from the Writing and Humanities program. Our music is by Dr. Vox and Catmosphere. I'm Dave Etler saying, don't let the bastards get you down. Talk to you in 1 week. Hi, Shortcoats. Look, life in medical education, life in America, life in the world is often difficult. And I often wish I could help. All I have is this podcast, but in my wildest dreams, you have the support you need to lead a life of your choosing. You deserve to be happy, healthy, and successful in whatever ways you define those words. So if you need support because you've experienced racism, discrimination, harassment, mental health crises, I want you to be able to get the help that you need. And so I'm going to put some links in the show notes to some resources that you can use. But the bottom line is that for what it's worth, I see you. I know you're out there. I wish I could do more. Maybe I can in ways that I don't understand yet or know about. But I see you, and I'm glad you're here, and other people are too.